when you compose, how do you start? Like, do you start at the start, or like was there a certain starting process, and how do you approach it in terms of structure?
I think I approach it differently all the time. This piece I definitely started at the start. Eventually, like I started it a million other times, and I thought I knew what it was going to be about 3 or 4 months before it was finished, which would be a really great time to know what it's supposed to be, but it turns out that wasn't what it was supposed to be. And I only sort of found it really probably a couple of weeks before the piece was due. So yeah, for this piece I was pregnant at the time, and so I was really focused a lot on my baby and thinking about her and her journey, and we were reading lots of different things about the baby's development, and I was really touched when I read that she could see in utero, so that there was this point when they're, I can't remember how far through it is now. I think it's sort of about halfway, maybe just over halfway through the pregnancy, where the baby can actually see through, and if you through your tummy, and if you shine a light, they can follow it. And I just sort of thought about, like, there'll be a first time that she does that. There will be, even if her eyes only open a tiny bit, and even if she's still in utero, that's going to happen for the first time at some point. And it just really blew me away to try to imagine that. And you sometimes see there's videos of people who have been cured for colour blindness on YouTube, or videos of like more in young children who get implants or whatever, and they can hear for the first time, and it's really mind-blowing to watch that experience. So I was imagining that, and I wanted to think about taking that moment, that sort of that instant, and stretching it out for as long as possible. Which led me to, I just, thinking about what that would be, I figured that it would be, the first thing that you would see would be like an increase in contrast. Like you would, you wouldn't, I doubt that you would immediately see everything. And so I sort of imagined that you would start to see something that wasn't just black, and then that slowly that thing that wasn't black would become more vibrant, and you'd see more, and then of course eventually when she was born, and then opening her eyes, in the rest of the world, like I was imagining what she would make of all the shapes and all the things, and having all these things come into focus, and all this sort of brand new information, but it's really started from that little instant.
And having just heard you guys play it, I can definitely see all of that in my mind now. It's really quite amazing. And so, from that, how did you choose your instrumentation?
Well, I knew I was writing for Ensemble Offspring, and so I was, which I was really excited about because I've performed with the group for a long time. And this was the first time that I was really writing something. I was thinking really about the colours and how to get, I suppose I was thinking who would be able to start the softest. And so I started with the bass clarinet. So thinking of turning this idea about light into tones, I thought about how does a tone start, how does a sound start, and for all of us it starts with a breath, particularly for wind instruments, and there's a nice synchronicity with that and the idea of life as well. So it starts with this just breath sound on the bass clarinet, and eventually that you add more pitch into that note. It starts with a single tone, and then the violin creeps a semitone above that to sort of try to get that really narrowness of sound. And then the flute comes into that world, and she adds more notes. So it's sort of like each player, as they come in, they kind of just stretching that fabric out a little bit, adding in a little more, a note below or a note above, and there's a little bit more ornamentation. And then we start to sort of really pass the new tones around the ensemble.
Yeah, it's kind of sort of growth happening.
Yeah.
And so after, sort of your initial draft, what corrections or what improvements or what changes came up when you were workshopping this with the actual musicians?
I think the main thing was, for me, which is a constant challenge, is to really get the notation right. And I find it quite difficult with things like this that are quite aleatoric. And I want it to be free. I want the performers to feel free, and I want the impulse to be relaxed, and I want there to be spontaneity. But you actually have to put in a lot of detail in order for that carefree kind of direction to be interpreted properly. And different performers want different things, and some people are happy to just go in minimal directions, and some people really need to be told exactly what to do. So what I ended up doing in this is basically write out a version of the piece that if it was played exactly like that, I would be perfectly happy, and people could just read it and play it. But that makes it look quite complicated and quite intricate and fussy. But if you played it like that, that would be great. But if you also just look at that kind of fussy notation and you see that there's, why is there there's a semi-quaver rest on the beat? I guess I should just play it after the beat. Like, that's all that means. So it's a matter of then decoding that kind of fussiness into just the intention of it. And it's a combination of short and long notes, and it should be more off the beat than on the beat. So yeah, that is definitely the biggest challenge, to make the notation really clear.
Yeah, great. And it's all about sort of finding that balance, isn't it? Speaking of aleatoricism, was there a particular reason that you chose to do it in this sort of aleatoric way?
That's really stemmed from my practice as a performer as well, because I'm not a good sight reader at all, and it just takes me a long time to learn things. And I find an interesting sort of intersection in music, that it is incredibly complex, like the stuff that Ensemble Offspring would play quite often, like this kind of spectral stuff and stochastic things like Xenakis and Grise, and things that are, heavy in the score. Like, there's a lot of instructions and there's a lot of specificity. And then going to listening to improvised performances from like the Now and organisations like that in Sydney who just are making things up on the spot. And I think that sometimes the audio difference, like the sonic difference and musical difference, is just very slim between that. And one has been made up instantaneously, and one has taken hours and hours and weeks, possibly months of preparation. So I just decided that I just would rather be in that camp for myself, and I don't want to put other performers through excruciating pain, just like not all the time, to play my music. So yeah, it's really about inviting the performer to have more interpretation and more expression in the piece, and to really bring themselves into it, and to have flexibility to respond with the people they're playing with as well.
Would you say that also applies with your use of extended techniques? Is that a similar reason why you sort of put those in there?
That's also just because I don't necessarily know how to notate them all either. I don't really know enough about this. Is actually one of the first proper pieces that I've written down on paper for other people to play. I've normally played it myself, or I've made a lot of recorded music or produced soundtracks, and I do a lot of improvising and workshopping, and collectively devising pieces together. But this is still one of the first times that I've actually written music and sent it off, to other people to play. So it's really about, the idiosyncrasies, like, I don't know what double stops work on the violin, and I don't know how long it's going to take to get from here to there. So as a process of learning that, I sort of just say, do that thing, it goes like this, and I just, I keep that open as well. Because I think that's another thing with notation, like you look up books about extended technique, and ones might be written in the 60s, and you have no idea if that's still used, or it's really, each composer sort of just makes it up, I think, to a large degree. There are some givens, but they're often developed so closely with the performers themselves that what works on one instrument with one performer just might not translate to another. So again, I find it a little bit easier to sort of just put the intention in the scores, just say, do a multiphonic with these notes, or just do some really short ricochets here, and then people can interpret that as they wish.
Yeah, definitely. And so speaking of drafts and versions, how often do you change the piece after it's finished? And what are your thoughts regarding, drafts and versions? Do you keep improving on the same draft and keep adding to it, or do you kind of have different versions and you kind of jump back and forth from one another?
I think once I get to a point where I'm really seriously working on the piece, then I've pretty much thrown out all the other drafts up to that point. And yeah, it is always going forward from there. And sometimes I feel like especially recently, I feel like I've wasted a lot of time. I've spent a lot of time doing drafts of versions of things that what I think the piece is, or trying to push it in a certain direction, and then it ends up not being like that, and I get a bit frustrated because it's been hours and hours and weeks of work that has seemingly gone away. But then some part of that always comes back, and I think that's a really important part of the process. That's like, right, yeah, that I'm back at this thing now, which is from this really early draft, but it's changed and it's it's here, but it's not as it was there. So I think that's a really beautiful part of the process that recently I've been finding that I've just been so tired when I've been writing, and subconsciously, like, I made a decision in a piece recently and I was like, wow, that's brilliant, like I'm right at the end and they're doing this thing that they just started right at the beginning, which is like, a recapitulation. It's like, it's a pretty old technique. A lot of people use that a lot of the time, but I wasn't thinking consciously of doing that. It just ended up that happened. So, sometimes your subconscious can, I'm giving my subconscious a lot more credit than my conscious.
Yeah. No, that's really encouraging to hear, especially for sort of aspiring composers, that they're not just by themselves, just trying to work fruitlessly. Like, things will, sort of come back and in an organic way.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really
things will
encouraging to hear.
emerge, and so
who did you listen to compose this piece? Like, do you have any particular composing influences?
I suppose I have really varied influences in what I listen to and what I play, and I don't think that I would have a particular influence for this. I think it comes more from a conceptual, a desire to create something conceptually, and I usually work more to a concept than a sort of style, I think. So if I have a concept that I want to be addressing or looking at, then that's sort of the impulse. And I don't know. I couldn't say that this is definitely influenced by one thing or another, but one thing about it compositionally is in the beginning section up until letter B, it works in a similar way to In C by Terry Riley. So each performer has cells, and I basically say repeat 1 to 2 times or repeat 3 to 4 times. And I don't really mind if one person is in bar 17, 18, repeat, and the other person's in bar 15, 16, repeating. Like, if you're sort of loosely in the same area as each other and you're all kind of moving, then that's fine by me. So that's definitely borrowed from Terry Riley, and that's the case.
Awesome. I played that in year 11, so that's great. Yeah. And so what are some of the biggest challenges or surprises that you encountered on this project? And what's the thing you like best about this piece?
What I think I like best about this piece that I wrote it for my daughter, and it's probably the first time that I sort of really openly put that much sort of emotional inspiration into a piece. And it's been really well received, and that's been really lovely. It's been performed a number of times already, and it's only, I only wrote it last year, and it's fantastic to be able to share it with you on this project. And Richard Gill programmed it earlier in the year with Concert with Ensemble Offspring, and so that's really exciting to feel like it continues to have a life of its own. And that I could, that's the first time actually I played it with Ensemble Offspring, because normally Claire, the artistic director, is playing that. So that's really fun for me as well to actually
play your own music.
Yeah, and it's been recorded now, and there's a beautiful video that's also been made for it. So all of those things are just really wonderful and special.
Yeah, awesome. And what are some sort of challenges or surprises you've encountered along the way in this project?
I still think that I need to look at the notation. Like looking at it today, I was just like, doesn't really make sense. Like it's sort of in my head, and I know from the number of times that I've had to explain it to people that it's obviously not clear. So,
yeah, always room for improvement.
Always room for improvement. So I actually think I really will just do that at some point. There's, again, just even some rhythmic things with the rhythmic notation that I try to notate a rubato in. So if I want something to sound really free, I notate how it sounds in my head in a kind of free version of this abstract rhythm, but that rhythm is not there anymore. So when I was looking at it then and I had to play it, I was just like, I know how it sounds in my head, but looking at those notes, it doesn't really correspond.
It's the age-old problem of translating what's in your head into notation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be really, it has to be clear, because it's just annoying when it's not. Like, as a performer, I know how annoying it is when it's not clear. It's like, and you shouldn't have to write an essay or have an in-depth conversation really about that. So that's my homework.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah, good. Bit of self-reflection never hurts.
Yeah.
And so this is for our aspiring composers out there. What advice would you give to some aspiring composers?
Go to lots of concerts and meet musicians and write music for people. And really, I think as a composer, it doesn't make sense if you're not writing music for people and if you're not engaging in music making. Because there is, as a performer, I'm always at gigs and working with my friends, and so that's been easier for me as a composer because I have a lot of contacts and friends who are musicians and have worked with a lot of different groups. But I think that's really a major thing, is to just, especially when you're at any age, but people always need some help. Like, Ensemble Offspring might need someone to put the chairs out at a gig, or hand out flyers, or collect names for a mailing list at the end, or it's a little bit of administrative help or something. I really think get in and meet people who are doing what you want to do, and if it's not other composers, then meet composers, meet performers, and go to concerts and just sort of be around and see what's happening and see if you can just work your way in, muscle your way into somewhere.
Yeah, that's some really solid advice. Well, that's the end of our interview. Thank you.